We're continuing on in the laws of Rosh Hashanah, Siman Tav Kuf Tzadik 590, which is Seder Haroi with Tekios Shofar, which means the appropriate order for blowing of the shofar. Uvay Chav Aleph Siman has 21 sifim. So this Siman is quite long, and it's really essentially the meat of all the halachas of Rosh Hashanah, because this is where we're really going to talk about the actual blowing of the shofar. We've talked about who should blow a shofar, the timing, the details of the shofar itself, where, etc. But this is the actual blowing of the shofar. And so there's a lot of details. And this siman really has three general parts. The first part is going to talk about the actual shofar blowing and what are the different sounds, the tekiah, the trua, shvarim, etc. Then we're going to talk about the timing and how long each part needs to last. And then we're going to have a lengthy discussion about what happens if you make a mistake in the blowing of the shofar. And so I'm going to try to give backgrounds for each section as we go, again, just to keep it clear. And this is something that you'll probably have to listen through, repeat a few times, look inside on the Shulchan Aruch as you do it, because sometimes it could be a little bit confusing, especially you'll see, and I'll try to explain the terminology as we go, but some of the terminology is kind of, I don't want to say changes as we go, but it can refer to more than one thing, and we can change how we're using it. So you have to be very careful with what words we're using. So I'll try to explain as we go. So let's start at general introduction of it, is that we're going to talk about what are the shofar sounds we need to hear and how many sounds total we need to hear. And I'm not talking about the individual blast, so to say, but how many notes. And in shofar blowing, the notes are in high, low, like it would be in Havdil secular music, but it has to do with the number and lengths of the individual sounds. And so in Chumash itself, there are 3 psukim that discuss the blowing of the shofar. And because of these 3 psukim, we have that there should be 3, so to say, sets of shofar blowing. And in one of these sets, which is about the Yovel, the Chachamim derive from this pasuk that there's going to be an actual shofar blast, which you call a trua, which is, we'll see, as the kind of the emotional sound of the shofar. But then, based on this pasuk, there has to be a kol pashut, a simple long sound, which we call tekiah before, and a tekiah after. So in other words, again, you have 3 psukim that describe blowing of the shofar with the word trua. And trua refers to the note that the shofar makes. Now, based on this other pasuk, though, each trua has to be preceded by a tekiah and also has to be followed by a tekiah. So in other words, we have 3 sets of tekiah, trua, tekiah, which means 9 notes total. That's the minimum. So again, tekiah, trua, tekiah, because of that first pasuk, then tekiah, trua, tekiah because of the second pasuk, and then tekiah, trua, tekiah because of the third pasuk, which means we're going to have total of 9 different notes. That would be easy enough. But here's the complication. Already in the Gemara, it tells us that there was some disagreement about what trua meant. And we're going to see in the Shulchan Aruch the details of this. Is this trua a sobbing, crying sound, which we would say was like, That was my great acting skills. Or is it like a quick cry, So because we have these 2 opinions, we end up with 2 different opinions about what the trua should be. One we call shvarim, which is the longer sobbing sounds, and one which we call in common language also trua, not to be confused with the general note trua, but this actual trua is this quick which would just be do in terms of the actual blowing of the shofar. Or is it both? Is it a do followed by do? In other words, shvarim and trua all is one. So because of that, we're going to see that now we have to do that whole set of 9, that whole 3 sets of 3 different ways. We have to do it one when that middle note is the shvarim. So we'll do tekiah, shvarim, tekiah, and we do that 3 times in case that's the opinion. Then we do another one where it's tekiah, our Trua Tekiah, then do, followed by another Tekiah. And we have to do that 3 times. And then we have to do another one where it's Shvarim and Trua in the middle. So we do a Tekiah, then Shvarim Trua, do, followed by another Tekiah. We have to do that 3 times. So we have then, therefore, 9 in the first set, 9 in the second set. And although it's technically like 9 in the third set, we count the Shvarim and Trua as separate notes in counting. So we end up with 9 plus 9 plus 12, right? We have 4, 4, and 4, which means 30 total. So on a practical level, we have 30 different shofar blasts. So that's the basic part of it. I'm going to get into more details as we go on, but keep that in mind for the first part. So let's jump right in. Aleph. How many tekiyas, how many shofar notes does a person have to hear in Rosh Hashanah? Teisha, 9. Terat. Terat is a Rosh Tevis, it's a acronym for Tekiah, Teruah, the resh is for Trua, and then Tekiah. So we do that 3 times. Terat, which is again Tekiah, Teruah, Tekiah, we do that 3 times. Lefi, why? Sheshlosh pa'amim Teruah nemar b'Torah, because there's 3 psukim that mention Teruah. Shnayim b'Rosh Hashanah, v'echad b'Yom Kippurim shel Yovel. 2 explicitly identify Rosh Hashanah. Another one identifies the Yovel, the Jubilee year for Yom Kippur. V'Piyah Shmuel lamdu shehem lameidin zemizeh. And in the Gemara, we're taught that this Yovel one is also corresponding to the Rosh Hashanah ones, and vice versa. U'lechach harehu ki'ilu kel shlosh pa'amim Teruah nemarim b'chol. And therefore, because they're all interrelated, we basically have 3 equivalent mentions of Teruah. But each of these Teruahs, like we mentioned, needs a simple note, what we call Tekiah, before and after. And these are called Tekiah Stam, the plain old Tekiah, because remember again, Tekiah we're using is in a colloquial term also just for a general shofar blast, as we have in previous Simanim. But here the Tekiah Stam, the plain, when we say Tekiah in and of itself, we're talking about this one simple sound. Shenemar, because the pasuk referring to Yovel says, V'avarta shofar Teruah. It has, within this pasuk, the first part says, V'avarta shofar Teruah, that you're gonna basically play the note for the shofar Teruah. Mashma tzatzarech lahavir kol pashat. So what is this note that we're passing through? Is a kol pashat. V'achar kach tiyeh haTeruah. So in other words, you have to start with the Tekiah, and then you have the Teruah. Deloshin ve'avarta mashma havaras kol pashat. And from the word ve'avarta, this implies that it starts with the kol pashat. V'achar haTeruah nemar ta'aviru shofar v'gomer. And then after that, it says ta'aviru, that again has a similar shirish, similar root. Mashma she'achar haTeruah tzarich gam kein lahaver kol pashat. And therefore, after the Teruah, you also need a kol pashat. You also need another Tekiah. V'chein b'chol Teruah bein shel Yovel bein shel Rosh Hashanah shehem lameidin zemizeh. And again, whether it's the Rosh Hashanah, Yovel, after Yom Kippur, doesn't matter. These are all going to be the same laws. And for our practical purposes nowadays, it's relevant for Rosh Hashanah. So we've established again, Terat. We have Tekiah, Teruah, Tekiah. We have to do that 3 times. And now the question, though, is what is that Teruah? Teruah zay ha'amura b'Torah. Now this Teruah that the Torah talks about, Misargamin, how is it translated into Aramaic? Because maybe that'll give us some hint. It's Yevava. That's how it translates Teruah, Yevava. And what does Yevava mean? Let's see, we actually have a pasuk. We have a pasuk, and this is in the section of Shoftim that talks about the war of the prophetess Devorah, and says, Ba'ad hachaloin nishkefa v'tiyabev em Sisra, that the mother of Sisra gazed through the window, and she was sobbing, she was crying. The word tiyabev is Yevava. It's this wailing. This is weeping, this crying. Mashma shahayavava. Therefore, this Yevava, he kekol sha'adam mashmi keshehu beichol miyalo. And therefore, when we say Yevava, in other words, when we say Teruah, we're talking about the sound that's typically made by someone who's not feeling well, and they're groaning. V'yeshlo his topic. Im Yavav Azoi, he Kamosh Derech HaChaylim, Shamarichim, Binichaisam, Umashim Ko, Achar Ko, Marichem Bem Katsas. Now, again, we know that this is the sound that a person makes. I inserted sick person, that's later on, but actually that's for this one. What does a cry sound like? And as I mentioned before, there's different ones. So maybe, the Alter Rebbe is saying, it's the one where a sick person is going to have these genichaisam, his groans, and they're going to be long and extended. V'zeu nikra ganach. This is what a sab is. This is a groan. Oy shehi kamay adam hamayalel umikainen shemashmir kohet ketzarim oy techufim zeh v'zeh. Or maybe it's like a person who's, when God forbid a person's mourning, doing like and there, it's like this quick little sob, these quick little cries. Zeh nikra yelo. This is yelo, as opposed to, again, the ganach, which was the sobbing or the moaning. Oy shehi kamosh nehem biyachad zeh achar zeh hayilala achar haganicha. Or maybe it's both in combination. A person does the moaning first with the long ones, and then they have the short, quick cries after. Shekein derech haboicha miganech v'achar kol miyalel. Just like commonly, people will at first they're just sobbing a little, and then the cries really fly. If you ever seen kids when they get upset, they start this, kind of these slower, long cries. Then they start to cry quickly after. So therefore, we have three opinions. Now, just to give background before we jump into the next section, so the Gemara mentions these different opinions, but the question is, practically, how do we not know? Didn't people always blow shofar? I mean, it's very easy to know. In fact, the Rishonim will agree that, people blow shofar, but yet some communities blowing the way of the long groans, yet some communities blowing with the short little ones. In other words, some doing the shvarim, some doing the artrua, and some doing the shvarim with trua. You had all three. But what's very interesting is how the Rishonim understand what was going on. For example, the Rambam, the Smag, others, they say people didn't know. People were trying to have different opinions about what was right, so they just didn't know. In other words, there is one right opinion about which it is. We just don't know which of the three. That knowledge was lost to us because of Galus, whatever it was. So in other words, why is that understanding important? Because that means of those three sets, you have to hear all three, because one of them is not right. Because two of them are not right, only one of them is right. Which means there's no way to, so to say, shorten it, even in a time of need, because you need to hear all three, because only one of the three is right. Versus Rav Hagain and other Rishonim who say, no. All three of the opinions are right. So all three of the communities were different. But it doesn't make sense to have one shul doing it one way, one shul doing it another way. This is a big difference. This is shofar. We got to have at least the right notes, the same notes. So therefore, we're going to see the Chachamim wanted them all to be the same. Why is this opinion relevant? Because then, in a time of need, you actually don't need to hear all three, because all three are right. So you could actually shorten it and do a combination, any combination, as long as you hear all 9 notes. As long as you hear, right, 3 times 3. And that's practically nowadays relevant in situations like Mivtzaim, or you're visiting people in a hospital. That's Kaf HaChaim brings that you can rely on this Rav Hagan. So let's see how the Alter Rebbe is phrasing it in Shulchan Aruch though. But Tignu Chachamim, the Chachamim made an ordinance as follows: Kedei Latseis Yedei Kol HaSveikus, in order to deal with all these 3 possibilities. We Tzukaya Tashrat Gimel Pa'amim. So they said first, you're going to have to sound Tashrat 3 times. Tashrat is Tekios, Shvarim, Trua, Tekios. And you have to do that 3 times. Shema Hatrua Hi Genicha Bilala Bi'achad. Because that's the opinion that you have both the cry, that long sobbing sound, and then the short little cries after. The Shvarim with Trua. V'achar kach Tashat. Then you have to do Tashat 3 times. You also need to have the one where it's Tekios, Shvarim, Tekios, Gimel Pa'amim. Why? Shema Hatrua Hi Genicha Levad. Because maybe the only right one is the groaning one. V'ahayu hayalalos hefsek ben hatrua v'hatkiya shalacharahu. And therefore, so what question could you come up with? You could say, well, even if it's just the sobbing sound, if you do that first opinion where you do them both, you do the shvarim and teruah, okay, so even if the opinion says it's just supposed to be the shvarim, the long one, who cares? All right, so you had an extra few notes in there. Because what did we learn? That each teruah needs a tekiah right before it and right after. So if those quick sounds is not supposed to be part of your teruah, then it's an interruption between the correct note, in this case the shvarim, and that last tekiah. And therefore you can't have those extra sounds in there. But why? You have to have again that tekiah right before and after without any interruptions. And then finally the Chachamim also said you have to have terat, tekiah, tekiah, also 3 times. Shema teruah hi hayilal levad, because maybe that's the real sounds, it's just those quick sounds. And in this case, if the teruah, so to say, is the right note, then what's going to happen if you have the shvarim in there? It's making a hefsek, it's making a division between your original tekiah and that teruah, which also then would not be okay. All right. Gimel. This is an interesting one. Im hitna b'tekiah achrayna shel gimel sidrei tashrat she'im seder tashrat hen him ikar hamitzvah talaloi tekiah zay letekiah achrayna shel tashrat im sidrei tashrat. So we'll stop there. So someone is blowing that tashrat, the first sets, which are the 3 sets of tekiah shvarim through a tekiah. That's where you have both the shvarim and teruah in the middle. And he's saying like this, I can't blow all these sounds. It's a lot. So if the tashrat, if this one is the real mitzvah, this is the one that really counts, then that final tekiah that I blow, right? Again, it's going to go tashrat, tashrat, tashrat. So it ends on a tekiah. If that's the real one that counts, then what are we going to do with that tekiah? V'im sidrei tashat heinikar mitzvah v'hem hu yotzi yidei chavai talalai tekiah zoi l'tekiah rishona shel tashat. That last tekiah, the tashrat, is just the tekiah. But if tashat is the real one, the next one, the tekiah shvarim tekiah, then that last tekiah of tashrat is actually going to be for me what? It's going to be the first tekiah of tashat. Because he wants to save himself one tekiah. And therefore, he doesn't have to sound another tekiah. When he sounds it, he's saving himself one tekiah. Because now, no matter what you look at it, he did his obligation. And you could do the same thing. If he says, okay, for tashat, before the tarat, there's a last tekiah, and I don't want to blow another tekiah for tarat. I'm trying to save my lungs one little sound. So you make a stipulation in your mind. But what if he doesn't make a stipulation? He just does it. Ein tekiah achas oila lishnei sidarim tashrat v'tashat v'loit v'tashat tarat. It doesn't work. You can't be counting one tekiah from one set for the other, and you can't play the game with mitzvahs tzrichas kavana, as we said at length in the previous Siman, that mitzvahs need kavana. Ve'im nis kavein b'tekiah zay hashlama seder tashrat ena aylu has chalas tashat. If you're going to intend that last tekiah is finishing the tashrat, it can't also be the beginning of your tashat, and etc. Im is kaven b'tekiah zay hashama said the tashat eno elam chalas tashat. Im tashat ikar mitzvah im kain shenis kaven b'tekiah zay hashalamas tashat im tegal shem mitzvah klau v'chem b'tekiah shebein tashat v'tarat. Between any of them, you can't just arbitrarily have one tekiah counting for both. There has to, otherwise it's basically you're just missing a note. The only way to do it is if you have this kavana.